Pasadena looked like a city at the bottom of a glass of sour milk. The Jet Propulsion Laboratory, on the outskirts of town, was nestled in the foothills near the Rose Bowl. But even at 8:30 in the morning, you couldn't see the mountains through the yellow-white haze. I tucked the box of tapes under my arm, showed my badge, signed the guard's clipboard, and swore I was an American citizen. The guard sent me to the main building, across an inner courtyard. For decades, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory had served as the command center for American spacecraft that photographed Jupiter and the rings of Saturn, and sent pictures back to Earth as video images. JPL was the place where modern video image processing had been invented. If anybody could copy these tapes, they could. Mary Jane Kelleher, the press secretary, took me up to the third floor. We walked down a lime green corridor, past several doors that opened into empty offices. I mentioned it. It's true, she said, nodding. We've been losing some good people, Peter. Where are they going? I said. Mostly to industry. We always lost a few to IBM in Armonk or Bell Labs in New Jersey. But those labs don't have the best equipment or funding anymore. Now it's the Japanese research labs like Hitachi in Long Beach, Sanyo in Torrance, Canon in Inglewood. They're hiring a lot of American researchers now. Is JPL concerned about it? Sure, she said. Everybody knows the best way to transfer to technology is inside somebody's head. But what can you do? She shrugged. Researchers want to do research. And America doesn't do so much R&D anymore. Budgets are tighter. So it's better to work for the Japanese. They pay well. And they genuinely respect research. If you need a piece of equipment, you get it. Anyway, that's what my friends tell me. Here we are. She took me into a laboratory crammed with video equipment, black boxes stacked on metal shelves and on metal tables, cables snaking across the floor, a variety of monitors and display screens. In the center of all this was a bearded man in his mid-30s named Kevin Houses. He had an image on his monitor of a gear mechanism in shifting rainbow colors. The desk was littered with Coke cans and candy wrappers. He had been up all night working. Kevin, this is Lieutenant Smith from the LAPD. He's got some unusual videotapes he needs copied. Just copied? Houses sounded disappointed. You don't want anything done to them? No, Kevin, she said. He doesn't. No problem. I showed Houses one of the cassettes. He turned it over in his hand and shrugged. Looks like a standard 8mm cut. What's on it? High definition Japanese TV? You mean it's an HD signal? I guess so. Shouldn't be a problem. You got a playback I can use? Yes. I took the playback machine out of the box and handed it to him. Geez, they make things nice, don't they? Beautiful unit. Kevin examined the controls in front. Yeah, that's high definition, all right. I can handle it. He turned the box around and peered at the plugs on the back. Then he frowned. He swung his desk lights over and opened the plastic flap on the cassette, exposing the tape. It had a faint silver tinge. Huh? Do these tapes involve anything legal? Actually, they do. He handed it back to me. Sorry, I can't copy it. Why not? See the silver color? That's evaporated metal tape. Very high density. I'll bet the format has real-time compression and decompression coming out of the box. I can't make you a copy because I can't match the formats, which means I can't lay down the signal in an equivalent way that is guaranteed readable. I can make you a copy, but I can't be sure the copy is exact because I can't match formats. So if you have any legal issues, and I assume you do, you're going to have to take it somewhere else to get it copied. Like where? This could be the new proprietary D4 format. If it is, the only place that can copy it is Hamaguchi, the research lab in Glendale, owned by Karakami Industries. They have every piece of video equipment known to man over there. I said, do you think they'd help me to make copies? Sure. I know one of the lab directors, Jim Donaldson. I can call over there for you if you like. That would be great. No problem. Hamaguchi Research Institute was a featureless, mirrored glass building in an industrial park in North Glendale. I carried my box into the lobby. Behind the sleek reception desk, I could see an atrium in the center of the building, and smoked glass-walled laboratories on all sides. I asked for Dr. Jim Donaldson, and took a seat in the lobby. While I was waiting, two men in suits came in, nodded familiarly to the receptionist, and sat on the couch near me. Ignoring me, they spread out glossy brochures on the coffee table. See here, one of them said. This is what I was talking about. This is the shot we end with. This one's closes. I glanced over, saw a view of wild flowers and snow-capped mountains. The first man trapped the photos. I mean, that's the Rockies, my friend. It's real Americana. Trust me. That's what sells them. And it's a hell of a parcel. How big did you say it is? It's 130,000 acres. The biggest remaining piece of Montana that's still available. 20 by 10 kilometers of prime ranch acreage, fronting on the Rockies. It's the size of a national park. It's got grandeur. It's got dimension, scope. It's very high quality. Perfect for a Japanese consortium. And they talked price? Not yet. But the ranchers, they're in a tough situation. It's legal now for foreigners to export beef to Tokyo, and beef in Japan is something like $22 a kilo. But nobody in Japan will buy American beef. If Americans send beef, it will rot on the docks. But if they sell their ranch to the Japanese, then the beef can be exported, because the Japanese will buy from a Japanese-owned ranch. The Japanese will do business with other Japanese, and ranches all around Montana and Wyoming have been sold. The remaining ranches see Japanese cowboys riding on the range. They see the other ranches putting in improvements, rebuilding barns, adding modern equipment, all that. Because the other ranches can get high prices in Japan. So the American owners, they're not stupid. They see the writing on the wall. They know they can't compete, so they sell. But then what do the Americans do? Stay and work for the Japanese. It's not a problem. The Japanese need someone to teach them how to ranch. And everybody on the ranch gets a raise. The Japanese are sensitive to American feelings. They are sensitive people. The second man said, I know, but I don't like it. I don't like the whole thing. That's fine, Ted. What do you want to do? What, you're a congressman? They're all working for the Japanese, anyway. Hell, the Japanese are running these ranches with American government subsidies. The first man twisted a gold chain at his wrist. He leaned close to his companion. Look, Ted, let's not get all moral here, because I can't afford it, and neither can you. We are talking a 4% overall in a 5-year payout on a 700 mil purchase. Let's make sure we keep that in sight, okay? You personally are looking at $2.4 million in the first year alone. It's a 5-year payout, right? I know, it just bothers me. Well, Ted, I don't think you'll be bothered when this deal closes. But there's a couple of details we need to handle. At that point, they seemed to realize I was listening. They stood up and moved out of earshot. I heard the first man say something about assurances that the state of Montana favors and approves, and the second man was nodding slowly. The first man punched him in the shoulder, cheering him up. Lieutenant Smith. A woman was standing beside my chair. Yes, I'm Crichton, Dr. Donaldson's assistant. Kevin over at JPL called about you. Something about tapes. You need help with? Yes, I need them copied. I'm sorry, I wasn't here to take Kevin's call. One of the secretaries took it, and she didn't really understand the situation. How's that? Unfortunately, Dr. Donaldson isn't here right now. He's making a speech this morning. I see. And that makes it difficult for us, with him not in the lab. I just want to copy some tapes. Perhaps someone else in the lab can help me, I said. Ordinarily, yes, but I'm afraid it's impossible today. It was the Japanese wall. Very polite, but a wall. I sighed. It was probably unrealistic to imagine a Japanese research company would help me. Even with something as neutral as copying tapes. I understand. Nobody's in the lab this morning at all. They were all working late on a rush project last night, and I guess they were here to all hours. So everybody's late coming in today. That's what the other secretary didn't understand. People are coming in late, so I don't know what to tell you. I made one last attempt. As you know, my boss is the chief of police. This is the second place I've stopped at already this morning. It's really riding me to get these duplicated right away. I'd love to help you, and I know Dr. Donaldson would be happy to. We've done special work for the police before, and I'm sure we can duplicate whatever material you have. Maybe later today? Or if you'd care to leave it with us. I'm afraid I can't do that. Okay, sure, I understand. Well, I'm sorry, Lieutenant. Perhaps you can come back later in the day. She gave a little shrug. I said, probably not. I guess it's just my bad luck that everybody had to work last night. Yes, it's a pretty unusual situation. What was it? Something came up. Research problem? I really don't know. We have so much video capability on site. Occasionally, we get a rush request for something unusual. A TV commercial that needs a special effect or something like that. We worked on that new Michael Jackson's video for Sony. Or somebody needs to restore tape that has been ruined. You know, we built the signal. But I don't know what came up last night. Except it must have been a lot of work. Something like 20 tapes to be worked on. And a real rush. I hear they didn't finish until after midnight. I thought, it can't be. I was trying to think what Connor would do. How he would handle it. I decided it was worth a stab in the dark. I said, "Well, I'm sure Nakamoto is grateful for all your hard work." "Oh, they are, because it turned out real. Well for them. They were happy." I said, "You mentioned that Mr. Donaldson was giving a speech." "Dr. Donaldson, yes. Where is he doing that?" "At a corporate training seminar at the Bonaventure Hotel. Measurement techniques in research. He must be pretty tired this morning, but he's always a good speaker." "Thanks, I gave her my card. You've been very helpful, and if there is ever anything you think of or want to tell me, call me." "Okay," she glanced at my card. "Thank you." I turned to go. As I was leaving, an American in his late 20s, wearing an Armani suit and the smug look of an MBA, who reads the fashion magazines, came down and said to the other two men, "Gentlemen, Mr. Nakagawa will see you now." The men leapt up, grabbed their glossy brochures and pictures, and followed the assistant as he walked in calm, measured strides toward the elevator. I went back outside, into the smog. The sign in the hallway read, "Working Together, Japanese and American Management Styles." Inside the conference room, I saw one of those twilight business seminars, where men and women sit at long tables, covered in gray cloth, taking notes in semi-gloom as a lecturer drones on at the podium. While I was standing there, in front of a table, with the name tags of latecomers, a bespectacled woman came over to me and said, "Have you registered? Did you get your packet?" I turned slightly and flashed my badge. I said, "I would like to speak to Dr. Donaldson. He's our next speaker. He's on in 7 or 8 minutes. Can someone else help you?" "It'll just take a moment." She hesitated. "But there's so little time before he speaks." "Then you better get going." She looked as if I had slapped her. I don't know what she expected. I was a police officer, and I'd asked to speak to somebody. Did she think it was negotiable? I felt irritable. Remembering the young fashion plate in the Armani suit, walking in measured steps, like a person of weight and importance. As he led the real estate salesman away, why did that kid think he was important? He might have an MBA, but he was still just answering the door for his Japanese boss. Now I watched the woman circle the conference room, moving toward the dais where 4 men waited to speak. The business audience was still taking notes as the sandy-haired man at the podium said, "There is a place for the foreigner in a Japanese corporation. Not at the top, of course, perhaps not even in the upper echelons, but there is certainly a place. You must realize that the place you hold as a foreigner in a Japanese corporation is an important one, that you are respected, and that you have a job to do. As a foreigner, you will have some special obstacles to overcome. But you can do that. You can succeed if you remember to know your place. I looked at the businessmen in their suits, with their heads bowed, taking notes. I wondered what they were writing. Know your place? The speaker continued. Many times you hear executives say, I have no place in the Japanese corporation, and I have to quit. Or you will hear people say, they didn't listen to me. I had no chance to get my ideas implemented. No chance for advancement. Those people didn't understand the role of a foreigner in Japanese society. They will not be able to fit in, and so they had to leave. But that is their problem. The Japanese are perfectly ready to accept Americans and other foreigners in their companies. Indeed, they are eager to have them, and you will be accepted so long as you remember your place. A woman raised her hand and said, What about prejudice against women in Japanese corporations? There is no prejudice against women, the speaker said. I've heard that women can't advance. That is simply not true. Then why all the lawsuits? Sumitomo Corp just settled a big anti-discrimination suit. I read 1/3 of Japanese corporations have had suits brought by American employees. What about that? It is perfectly understandable, the speaker said. Any time a foreign corporation begins to do business in a new country, it is likely to make mistakes while it gets used to the habits and patterns of the country. When American corporations first went multinational in Europe in the 50s and 60s, they encountered difficulties in the countries they entered, and there were lawsuits then. So it is not remarkable that Japanese corporations also have some period of adjustment coming into America. It is necessary to be patient. A man said with a laugh, Is there ever a time when it's not necessary to be patient with Japan? But he sounded rueful, not angry. The others in the room continued to make notes. Officer, I'm Jim Donaldson. What is this about? I turned. Dr. Donaldson was a tall, thin man with glasses and a precise, almost prissy air. He was dressed in collegiate style, a tweed sport coat and a red tie. But he had the nerd pack of pens packing out of his shirt pocket. I guessed he was an engineer. I just had a couple of questions about the Nakamoto tapes. The Nakamoto tapes? The ones in your laboratory last night. My laboratory? Mr. Smith, Lieutenant Smith. I gave him my card. Lieutenant, I'm sorry, but I don't know what you're talking about. Tapes in my lab last night? Christine, your secretary, said everybody in the lab was working late on some tapes. Yes, that's true. Most of my staff. And the tapes came from Nakamoto? From Nakamoto? He shook his head. Who told you that? She did. I assure you, Lieutenant, the tapes were not from Nakamoto. I heard there were 20 tapes. Yes, at least 20. I'm not sure of the exact number, but they were from McCain Erickson, an ad campaign for Asahi beer. We had to do a logo transformation on every ad in the campaign. Now that Asahi beer is the #1 beer in America, but the question of Nakamoto. "Lieutenant," he said impatiently, glancing at the podium, "let me explain something. I work for Hamaguchi Research Labs. Hamaguchi is owned by Karakami Industries, a competitor to Nakamoto. Competition among the Japanese corporations is very intense. Very intense. Take my word for it. My lab didn't do any work on any Nakamoto tapes last night. Such a thing would never happen, under any circumstances. If my secretary said it did, she's mistaken. It's absolutely out of the realm of possibility. Now I have to give a speech. Is there anything else?" "No," I said. "Thanks." There was scattered applause as the speaker on the podium finished. I turned and left the room. I was driving away from the Bonaventure when Connor called in from the golf course. He sounded annoyed. "I got your page. I had to interrupt my game. This better be good." I told him about the 1 o'clock appointment with Senator Morton. "All right," he said. "Pick me up here at 10:30. Anything else?" I told him about my trips to JPL and Hamaguchi. Then my conversation with Donaldson. Connor sighed. "That was a waste of time." "Why?" "Because Hamaguchi is funded by Karakami, and they're in competition with Nakamoto. There's no way they would do anything to help Nakamoto." That's what Donaldson told me," I said. Where are you going now?" "To the USC Video Labs. I'm still trying to get the tapes copied." Connor paused. "Anything else I should know?" "No." "Fine. See you at 10:30. "Why so early?" 10:30, he said, and hung up. As soon as I hung up, the phone rang. "You were supposed to call me." It was Ken Shubik at the Times. He sounded sulky. "Sorry, I got tied up. Can we talk now?" "Sure." "You got information for me?" "Listen," he paused. "Are you anywhere around here?" "About 5 blocks from you." "Then come by for a cup of coffee." "You don't want to talk on the phone?" "Well, come on, Ken. You always want to talk on the phone." Shubik was like all the Times reporters. He sat at his desk in front of his computer and wore a headset and talked on the phone all day long. It was his preferred way of doing things. He had all this stuff in front of him. He could type his notes into the computer as he talked. When I was a press officer, my office had been at police headquarters in Parker Center, 2 blocks from the Times building, and still a reporter like Ken would rather talk to me on the phone than see me in person. "Come on by, Pete." That was clear enough. Ken didn't want to talk on the phone. "Okay, fine," I said. "See you in 10 minutes. The Los Angeles Times is the most profitable newspaper in America. The newsroom takes up one entire floor of the Times building, and thus is the area of a city block. The space has been skillfully subdivided, so you are never confronted by how large it actually is, and how many hundreds of people work there. But still it seems you walk for days past reporters, sitting at clusters of modular workstations with their glowing computer screens, their blinking telephones, and their tacked up pictures of the kids. Ken's workstation was in Metro, on the east side of the building. I found him standing by his desk, pacing, waiting for me. He took me by the elbow. "Coffee," he said. "Let's get coffee." What is it? I said. You don't want to be seen with me. No shit. I want to avoid the weasel. He's down hustling the new girl on foreign. She doesn't know any better yet. Ken nodded toward the far end of the newsroom. There be the windows. I saw the familiar figure of Willie Wilhelm, known to everyone as Weasel Wilhelm. Willie's narrow, ferret-like face was at this moment composed into a mask of smiling attentiveness as he joked with a blonde girl sitting before a terminal. Very cute, yeah. A little big in the rear. She's Dutch, Ken said. She's only been here a week. She hasn't heard about him. Most organizations had a person like the Weasel. Somebody who is more ambitious than scrupulous. Somebody who finds a way to make himself useful to the powers that be, while being roundly hated by everyone else. That was the case with Weasel Wilhelm. Like most dishonest people, the Weasel believed the worst about everybody. He could always be counted on to portray events in their most unflattering light, insisting that anything less was a cover-up. He had a nose for human weakness and a taste for melodrama. He cared nothing for the truth of any situation, and he considered a balanced appraisal weak. As far as the Weasel was concerned, the underlying truth was always strong stuff, and that was what he dealt in. The other reporters at the Times despised him. Ken and I went into the central hallway. I followed him towards the coffee machines, but he led me into the library in the middle of the floor. The Times had a library that was larger and better equipped than many college facilities. So, what is it about Wilhelm? I said. He wasn't here last night, Ken said. I came by after the theater to pick up some neat notes I needed for a morning interview I was doing from home, and I saw the Weasel in the library, maybe 11 o'clock at night. You know how ambitious the little turd is. I could see it in his face. He had the scent of blood. So naturally, you want to know about what? Naturally, I said. The Weasel was an accomplished backstabber. A year earlier, he had managed to get the editor of the Sunday calendar fired. Only at the last minute did he fail to land the job himself. Ken said, so I whispered to Lily, the night librarian. What is it? What's the Weasel up to? She says, he's checking police reports on some cop. So that's a relief, I think. But then I begin to wonder. I'm still the senior Metro reporter. I still do a story out of Parker Center a couple of times a month. What does he know that I don't? For all I know, this should be my story. So I said to Lily, what's the name of this cop? Let me guess, I said. That's right, Ken said. Peter J. Smith. What time was this? About 11. Great, I said. I thought you'd want to know, Ken said. I do. So I said to Lily, this is last night. I said, Lily, what kind of stuff is he pulling? And he's pulling everything, all the old clips from the morgue. And apparently, he's got a source inside Parker who's going to leak him internal affairs records. Some kind of a hearing about child molestation charge brought a couple of years ago. Ah, shit, I said. That true? Ken said. There was a hearing, I said, but it was bullshit. Ken looked at me. Fill me in. It was 3 years back, I said. I was still working detective. My partner and I answered a domestic violence call in Ladera Heights. Hispanic couple fighting, both very drunk. Woman wants me to arrest her husband, and when I refuse to, says he's sexually abusing her baby. I go look at the baby. The baby looks okay. I still refuse to arrest the husband. The woman is pissed. The next day, she comes in and accuses me of sexual molestation. There's a preliminary hearing. Charges dismissed as without merit. Okay, Ken said. Now you got any travel that's questionable? I frowned. Travel? The weasel was trying to locate travel records last night. Airplane trips, junkets, padded expenses. I shook my head. It doesn't ring a bell. Yeah, I figured he must be wrong about that one. You're a single parent. You're not going on any junkets. No way. Good. We were walking deeper into the library. We came to a corner where we could see out to the metro section of the corner. Where we could see out to the metro section of the newsroom through glass walls. I saw the weasel still talking to the girl, chatting her up. I said, what I don't understand, Ken, is why me? I mean, I got no heat on me at all. No controversy. I haven't been a working detective for 3 years. I'm not even a press officer anymore. I'm liaison. I mean, what I do is political. So why is a Times reporter gunning for me? At 11 o'clock on a Thursday night, you mean, Ken said. He was staring at me like I was an idiot. Like there was drool coming down my chin. I said, you think the Japanese are doing this? I think the weasel does jobs for people. He is a scumbag for hire. He does jobs for the studios, record companies, brokerage houses, even the realtors. He's a consultant. The weasel now drives a Mercedes 500 SL, you know. Oh yeah? Pretty good on a reporter's salary, wouldn't you say? Yeah, I would. So you got on the wrong side of somebody. You do that last night, maybe. Because somebody calls the weasel to track you down. I said, I can't believe this. Believe it, Ken said. The only thing that worries me is the weasel's source inside Parker Center. Somebody in the department leaking him internal affairs stuff. You're okay inside your own department, as far as I know. Good, because the weasel is up to its usual tricks. This morning I talked to Roger Bascombe, our in-house counsel, and guess you called him all hot and bothered with a question last night. The weasel. And you want to guess what the question was? I said nothing. The question was, does serving as a police press officer make an individual a public personality? As in a public personality who can't sue for libel. I said, Jesus, right. And the answer? Who cares about the answer? You know how this works. All the weasel has to do is call a few people and say, Hi, this is Bill Wilhelm. Over here at the LA Times. We are going with a story tomorrow that says Lieutenant Peter Smith is a child molester. Do you have any comment on that? A few well-placed calls, and the story doesn't even have to run. The editors can kill it, but the damage is already done. I said nothing. I knew what Ken was telling me was true. I had seen it happen more than once. I said, "What can I do?" Ken laughed. "You could arrange one of your famous incidents of LA police brutality." "That's not funny." "Nobody at this paper would cover it. I can promise you that. You could fucking kill him, and if somebody made a home video, hey, people here would pay to see it on video." Ken sighed. "I can dream, okay? There's one thing last year after Wilhelm was involved in the change of management over in Calendar. I got an anonymous package in the mail. So did a few other people. Nobody did anything about it at the time. It's pretty dirty pool. You interested?" "Yeah." Ken took a small manila envelope from the inside pocket of his sport coat. It had one of those strings that you wrap back and forth to close it. Inside was a series of photos printed in a strip. It showed Willy Wilhelm engaged in an intimate act with a dark-haired man, his head buried in his lap. You can't see the weasel's face too well, in all the angles, Ken said, but it's him all right. Action snap of the reporter entertaining his source, having a drink with him, so to speak. Who is the guy? It took us a while. His name is Barry Borman. He's the regional head of sales for Kisei Electronics in Southern California. "What can I do with this?" "Give me your card," Ken said. "I'll clip it to the envelope and have it delivered to the Weasel." I shook my head. "I don't think so." "It'll sure make him think twice." "No," I said. "It's not for me." Ken shrugged. "Yeah, it might not work anyway, even if we squeeze the Weasel's nuts. The Japanese probably have other ways. I still haven't been able to find out how that story ran last night. All I hear is orders from the top, orders from the top. Whatever that means. It could mean anything. Somebody must have written it. I tell you, I can't find out. But you know the Japanese have a powerful influence at the paper. It's more than just the ads they take. It's more than their relentless PR machine drumming out of Washington, or the local lobbying and the campaign contributions to political figures and organizations. It's the sum of all those things and more. And it's starting to be insidious. I mean, you can be sitting around in a staff meeting discussing some article that we might run, and you suddenly realize nobody wants to offend them. It isn't a question of whether a story is right or wrong, news or not news, and it isn't a one-to-one equation like, we can't say that or they'll pull their ads. It's more subtle than that. Sometimes I look at my editors, and I can tell they won't go with certain stories because they are afraid. They don't even know what they are afraid of. They are just afraid. So much for a free press. "Hey," Ken said, "this is not the time for sophomore bullshit. You know how it works. The American press reports the prevailing opinion. The prevailing opinion is the opinion of the group in power. The Japanese are now in power. The press reports the prevailing opinion as usual. No surprises. Just take care." "I will. And don't hesitate to call if you decide you want to arrange mail service." I wanted to talk to Connor. I was beginning to understand why Connor had been worried, and why he had wanted to conclude the investigation quickly. Because a well-mounted campaign of innuendo is a fearsome thing. A skillful practitioner, and the reason was skillful, would arrange it so that a news story came out, day after day, even when nothing happened. You got headlines like Grand Jury, undecided on policeman's guilt, when in fact the grand jury hadn't met yet. But people saw the headlines day after day and drew their own conclusions. The truth was, there was always a way to spin it. At the end of the innuendo campaign, if your subject was found blameless, you could still mount a headline like "Grand Jury Fails to Find Policeman Guilty," or "District Attorney Unwilling to Prosecute Accused Cop." Headlines like that were as bad as a conviction. And there was no way to bounce back from weeks of negative press. Everybody's remembered the accusation. Nobody remembered the exoneration. That was human nature. Once you were accused, it was tough to get back to normal. It was getting creepy, and I had a lot of bad feelings. I was a little preoccupied pulling into the parking lot next to the physics department at USC when the phone rang again. It was Assistant Chief Olson. "Peter." "Yes, sir." "It's almost 10 o'clock. I thought you'd be down here putting the tapes on my desk. You promised them to me. I've been having trouble getting the tapes copied." "Is that what you've been doing?" "Sure, why?" "Because from the calls I get, it sounds like you aren't dropping this investigation," Jim Olson said. "In the last hour, you've been out asking questions at a Japanese research institute. Then you've interrogated a scientist who works for the Japanese Research Institute. You're hanging around some Japanese seminar. Let's get it straight, Peter. Is the investigation over or not?" "It's over," I said. "I'm just trying to get the tapes copied." "Make sure that's all it is," he said. "Right, Jim. For the good of the whole department and the individuals in it. I want this thing behind us." "Right, Jim. I don't want to lose control of this situation. I understand." "I hope you do," he said. "Get the copies made and get your ass down here." And he hung up. I parked the car and went into the physics building. I waited at the top of the lecture hall while Philip Sanders finished his lecture. He stood in front of a blackboard covered with complex formulas. There were about 30 students in the room, most of them seated down near the front. I could see the backs of their heads. Dr. Sanders was about 40 years old, one of those energetic types, in constant motion, pacing back and forth, taping the equations on the blackboard, in short, emphatic jabs, with his chalk as he pointed to the signal, covariant ratio determination, and the factorial delta bandwidth noise. I couldn't even guess what subject he was teaching. Finally, I concluded it must be electrical engineering. When the bell rang on the hour, the class stood and packed up their bags. I was startled. Nearly everyone in the class was Asian, both men and women. Those that weren't Asians were Indians or Pakistani. Out of 30 students, only 3 were right. That's right, Sanders said to me later, as we walked down the hallway toward his laboratory. A class like Physics 101 doesn't attract Americans. It's been that way for years. Industry can't find them either. We would be up shit creek if we didn't have the Asians and Indians who come here to get doctorates in math and engineering, and then work for American companies. We continued down some stairs and turned left. We were in a basement passageway. Sanders walked quickly. But the trouble is, it's changing, he continued. My Asian students are starting to go home. Koreans are going back to Korea. Taiwanese the same. Even Indians are returning home. The standard of living is going up in their countries, and there's more opportunity back home now. Some of these foreign countries have large numbers of well-trained people. He led me briskly down a flight of stairs. Do you know what city has the highest number of PhDs per capita in the world? Boston? Seoul, Korea. Think about that as we walk it into the 21st century. Now we were going down another corridor, then briefly outside into sunlight, down a covered walkway, and back into another building. Sanders kept glancing back over his shoulder, as if he was afraid of losing me. But he never stopped talking. And with foreign students going home, we don't have enough engineers to do American research, to create new American technology. It's a simple balance sheet. Not enough trained people. Even big companies like IBM are starting to have trouble. Trained people simply don't exist. Watch the door. The door swung back towards me. I went through. I said, But if there are all these high-tech job opportunities, won't they begin to attract students? Not like investment banking or law, Sanders laughed. Americans may lack engineers and scientists, but we lead the world in the production of lawyers. America has half the lawyers in the entire world. Think of that. He shook his head. We have 4% of the world population. We have 18% of the world economy. But we have 50% of the lawyers. And 35,000 more every year, pouring out of the schools. That's where our productivity is directed. That's where our national focus is. Half our TV shows are about lawyers. America has become land of lawyers. Everybody's suing. Everybody disputing. Everybody in court. After all, 750,000 Americans lawyers have to do something. They have to make their $300,000 a year. Other countries think we're crazy. He unlocked a door. I saw a sign that said Advanced Imaging Laboratory in hand-painted lettering. In an arrow, Sanders led me down a long basement hallway. Even our brightest kids are badly educated. The best American kids now rank 12th in the world after the industrialized countries of Asia and Europe. And that's our top students. At the bottom, it's worse. 1/3 of high school graduates can't read a bus schedule. They're illiterate. We came to the end of the hallway and turned right. And the kids I see are lazy. Nobody wants to work. I teach physics. It takes years to master, but all the kids want to dress like Charlie Sheen and make $1 million before they are 28. The only way you can make that kind of money is in law, investment banking, Wall Street, places where the game is paper profits. Something for nothing. But that's what the kids want to do these days. Maybe at USC? Trust me. Everywhere they all watch television. He swung another door open. Still another corridor. This one smelled moldy, damp. I know I'm old-fashioned, Sanders said. I still believe that every human being stands for something. You stand for something. I stand for something. Just being on this planet, wearing the clothes we wear, doing the work we do. We each stand for something. And in this little corners of the world, he said, we stand for cutting the crap. We analyze network news. Analyze network news and see where they have been fucking around with the tape. We analyze TV commercials and show where the tricks are. Sanders suddenly stopped. What's the matter? Wasn't there someone else? He said. Didn't you come here with someone else? No, just me. Oh, good. Sanders continued on at his same breakneck pace. I always worry about losing people down here. Okay, here we are. The lab. Good. This door is just where I left it. With a flourish, he threw the door open. I stared at the room, shocked. I know it doesn't look like much, Sanders said. That I thought was a serious understatement. I was looking at a basement space with rusty pipes and fittings hanging down from the ceiling. The green linoleum on the floor curled up in several places to expose concrete beneath. He had arranged around the room were battered wooden tables, each heaped with equipment and drooping wires down the sides. At each table, a student sat facing monitors in several places. Water plinked into buckets on the floor. Sanders said, the only space we could get was here in the basement, and we don't have the money to put in little amenities like a ceiling. Never mind, doesn't matter. Just watch your head. He moved forward into the room. I am about 180 centimeters tall, not quite 6 feet, and I had to crouch to enter the room. From somewhere in the ceiling above, I heard a harsh rasping sizzle. Skaters, Sanders explained. Sorry, we're underneath the ice rink. You get used to it. Actually, it's not bad now. When they have hockey practice in the afternoon, then it's a bit noisy. We moved deeper into the room. I felt like I was in a submarine. I glanced at the students at their workstations. They were all intent on their work. Nobody looked up as we passed. Sanders said, what kind of tape do you want to duplicate? 8mm, Japanese, security tape. It might be difficult. Difficult? I doubt that very much, Sanders said. You know, back in my youth, I wrote most of the early video image enhancement algorithms. You know, the speckling and inversion and edge tracing. That stuff. The Sanders algorithm were the were the ones everybody used. I was a graduate student at Caltech. Then I worked at JPL in my spare time. No, we can do it. I handed him a tape. He looked at it. Cute little bugger. I said, "What happened to all your algorithms?" "There was no commercial use for them," he said. "Back in the 80s, American companies like RCA and GE got out of commercial electronics entirely. My image enhancement programs didn't have much use in America." He shrugged. "So I tried to sell them to Sony in Japan. And the Japanese had already patented the products in Japan." "You mean they already had the algorithms?" "No. They just had patents. In Japan, patenting is a form of war. The Japanese patent like crazy, and they have a strange system. It takes 8 years to get a patent in Japan, but your application is made public after 18 months, after which royalties are moot. And of course, Japan doesn't have reciprocal licensing agreements with America. It's one of the ways they keep their edge. Anyway, when I got to Japan, I found Sony and Hitachi had some related patents, and they had done what is called patent flooding, meaning they covered possible related uses. They didn't have the rights to use my algorithms. But I discovered I didn't have the rights either, because they had already patented the use of my invention." He shrugged. "It's complicated to explain." Anyway, that's ancient history. By now, the Japanese have devised much more complicated video software, far surpassing anything we have. They're years ahead of us now, but we struggle alone in this lab. "Ah, just the person we need. Dan, are you busy?" A young woman looked up from the computer console. Large eyes, horn-rimmed glasses, dark hair. Her face was partially blocked by the ceiling pipes. "You're not Dan," Sanders said, sounding surprised. "Where's Dan, Teresa?" "Picking up a midterm," Teresa said. "I'm just helping run the real-time progressions. They're finishing now." I had the impression that she was older than the other students. It was hard to say why exactly. It certainly wasn't her clothes. She wore a bright-colored headband and a U2 t-shirt under a jean jacket, but she had a calm quality that made her seem older. "Can you switch to something else?" Sanders said, walking around the table to look at the monitor. "Because we have a rush job here. We have to help out the police." I followed Sanders, ducking pipes. "Sure, I guess," the woman said. She started to shut down units on the desk. Her back was turned to me, and then finally I could see her. She was dark, exotic looking, almost Eurasian. In fact, she was beautiful. Drop-dead beautiful. She looked like one of those high-cheek-boned models in magazines. And for a moment I was confused, because this woman was too beautiful to be working in some basement electronics laboratory. It didn't make sense. "Say hello to Teresa Asakuma," he said. "The only Japanese graduate student working here." "Hi," I said. I blushed. I felt stupid. I felt that information was coming at me too fast. And all things considered, I would rather not have a Japanese handling these tapes. But her first name wasn't Japanese, and she didn't look Japanese. She looked Eurasian, or perhaps part Japanese. So exotic, maybe she was even... "Good morning, Lieutenant," she said. She extended her left hand, the wrong hand for me to shake. She held it out to me sideways, the way someone does when their right hand is injured. I shook hands with her. "Hello, Miss Asakuma." "Teresa. Okay." "Isn't she beautiful?" Sanders said, acting as if he took credit for it. "Just beautiful." "Yes," I said. "Actually, I'm surprised you're not a model." There was an awkward moment. I couldn't tell why. She turned quickly away. "It never interested me," she said. "And Sanders needs us to copy some tapes." "These tapes." Sanders held one out to her. She took it in her left hand and held it to the light. Her right hand remained bent at the elbow, pressed to her waist. Then I saw that her right arm was withered, ending in a fleshy stump, protruding beyond the sleeve of a jean jacket. It looked like the arm of the thalidomide baby. "Quite interesting," she said, squinting at the tape. 8mm, high density. Maybe it's the proprietary digital format we've been hearing about. The one that includes real-time image enhancement." "I'm sorry, I don't know," I said. I was feeling foolish for having said anything about being a model. I dug into my box and brought out the playback machine. Teresa immediately took a screwdriver and removed the top. She bent over the innards. I saw a green circuit board, a black monitor, and 3 small crystal cylinders. "Yes, it's the new setup. Very slick. Dr. Sanders, look. They are doing it with just 3 heads. The board must generate component RGB. Because over here, you think this is compression circuitry. Probably digital to analog converter," Sanders said. "Very neat, so small." He turned to me, holding up the box. "You know how the Japanese can make things this way, and we can't? They kaizen them. A process of deliberate patent, continual refinements. Each year, the product gets a little better, a little smaller, a little cheaper. Americans don't think that way. Americans are always looking for the quantum leap, the big advance forward. Americans try to hit a home run, to knock it out of the park, and then sit back. The Japanese just hit singles all day long, and they never sit back. So with something like this, you're looking at an expression of philosophy as much as anything." He talked like this for a while, pivoting the cylinders, admiring it. Finally I said, "Can you copy the tapes?" "Sure," Teresa said. "From the converter. We can run a signal out of the machine and lay it down on whatever media you like. You want 3/4, optical master, VHS?" "VHS," I said. "That's easy," she said. "But will it be an accurate copy? The people at JPL said they couldn't guarantee the copy would be accurate." "Oh hell, JPL," Sanders said. "They just talk like that because they work for the government. We get things done here, right, Teresa?" But Teresa wasn't listening. I watched her plugging cables and wires, moving swiftly with a good hand, using her stump to stabilize and hold the box, like many disabled people. Her movements were so fluid, it was hardly noticeable that her right hand was missing. Soon she had the small playback machine hooked to a second recorder and several different monitors. What are all these? To check the signal? You mean for playback? No, the big monitor there will show the image. The others let me look at the signal characteristics and the data map, how the image has been laid down on the tape. I said, you need to do that? No, I just want to snoop. I'm curious about how they've set up this high density format. Sandra said to me, what is the actual source material? It's from the office security camera. And this tape is original? I think so. Why? Well, if it's original material, we want to be extra careful with it, Sanders said. He was talking to Teresa, instructing her. We don't want to set up any feedback loops, scrambling the media surface, or signal leaks off the heads that will compromise the integrity of the data stream. Don't worry, she said. I got it handled. She pointed to her setup. See that? It'll warn off an impedance shift. And I'm monitoring the central processor too. Okay, Cinda said. He was beaming like a proud parent. How long would this take? I said. Not long. We can lay down the signal at very high speed. The rate limit is a function of the playback device, and it seems to have a fast-forward scan, so maybe 2 or 3 minutes per tape. I glanced at my watch. I have a 10:30 appointment. I can't be late for, and I don't want to leave these. You need all of them done? Actually, just 5 are critical. Then let's do those first. We ran the first few seconds of each tape, one after another, looking for the 5 that came from the cameras on the 46th floor. As each tape started, I saw the camera image on the central monitor of Teresa's table. On the side monitors, signal traces bounced and jiggled like an intensive care unit. I mentioned it. That's just about right, she said. Intensive care for video. She ejected one tape, stuck in another, and steered it and started it up. Oops, did you say this material was original? It's not. These tapes are copies. How do you know? Because we got a wind-up signature. Teresa bent over the equipment, staring at the signal traces, making fine adjustments with the knobs and dials. I think that's what you got, yes, Cinder said. He turned to me. You see, with video, it's difficult to detect a copy in the image itself. The older analog video shows some degradation in successive generations. But in a digital system like this, there is no difference at all. Each copy is literally identical to the master. Then how can you say the tapes are copies? Teresa isn't looking at the picture, Sandra said. She's looking at the signal. Even though we can't detect a copy from the image, sometimes we can determine the image came from another video playback instead of a camera. I shook my head. How? Teresa said, it has to do with how the signal is laid down. In the first half second of taping, if the recording video is started before the playback video, there is sometimes a slight fluctuation in the signal output as the playback machine starts up. It's a mechanical function, The playback motors can't get up to speed instantaneously. There are electronic circuits in the playback machine to minimize the effect, but there's always an interval of getting up to speed. And that's what you detected? She nodded. It's called a wind-up signature. Sanders said, and that never happens if the signal is coming direct from a camera, because the camera has no moving parts. A camera is instantaneously up to speed at all times. I frowned. So these tapes are copies. Is that bad? Sanders said. I don't know if they were copied. They might also be changed, right? In theory, yes, Sanders said. In practice, we'd have to look carefully, and it would be very hard to know for certain. These tapes come from a Japanese company. Yes. Nakamoto? I nodded. Yes. Frankly, I'm not surprised they gave you copies, Sanders said. The Japanese are extremely cautious. They're not very trusting of outsiders. And Japanese corporations in America feel the way we would feel doing business in Nigeria. They think they're surrounded by savages. Hey, Teresa said. Sorry, Sanders said, but you know what I mean. The Japanese feel they have to put up with us, with our ineptitude, our slowness, our stupidity, our incompetence. That makes them self-protective. So if these tapes have any legal significance, the last thing they do is turn the originals over to a barbarian policeman like you. No. They give you a copy and keep the original in case they need it for their defense. Fully confident that with your inferior American video technology, you'd never be able to detect that it was a copy anyway. I frowned. How long would it take to make copies? Not long, Sanders said, shaking his head. The way Teresa is scanning now, 5 minutes a tape. I imagine the Japanese can do it much faster. Say 2 minutes a tape? In that case, they had plenty of time to make copies last night. As we talked, Teresa was continuing to shuffle the tapes, looking at the first portions of each. As each image came up, she'd glance at me. I would shake my head. I was seeing all the different security cameras. Finally, the first of the tapes from the 46th floor appeared. The familiar office image I had seen before. That's one. Okay, here we go. Laying it onto VHS, Teresa started the first copy. She ran the tape forward at high speed. The images streaky and quick. On the side monitors, the signals bounced and jittered nervously. She said, "Does this have something to do with the murder last night?" "Yes, you know about that?" She shrugged. "I saw it on the news. The killer died in a car crash." "That's right," I said. She was turned away. The three-quarter profile of her face was strikingly beautiful. The high curve of her cheekbone. I thought of what a playboy Eddie Sakamura was known to be. I said, "Did you know him?" "No," she said. After a moment, she added, "He was Japanese." Another moment of awkwardness descended on our little group. There was something not that both Teresa and Sanders seemed to know that I did not. But I didn't know how to ask, so I watched the video. Once again, I saw the sunlight moving across the floor. Then the room lights came up as the office personnel thinned. Now the floor was empty, and then, at high speed, Cheryl Austin appeared, followed by the man. They kissed passionately. "Aha," Sanders said. "Is this it?" "Yes." He frowned as he watched the action progress. "You mean the murder is recorded?" "Yes," I said, "on multiple cameras." "You're kidding." Sanders fell silent, watching events proceed. With the streaky high-speed image, it was difficult to see more than the basic events. The two people moving to the conference room, the sudden struggle forcing her back on the table, stepping away suddenly, leaving the room in haste. Nobody spoke. We all watched the tape. I glanced at Teresa. Her face was blank. The image was reflected in her glasses. Eddie passed the mirror and went into the dark passageway. The tape ran on for a few more seconds, and then the cassette popped out. "That's one. You say there are multiple cameras? How many altogether?" "5, I think," I said. She marked the first cassette with a stick-on label. She started the second tape in the machine and began another high-speed duplication. I said, "These copies are exact?" "Oh, yes." "So they are legal?" Sanders frowned. "Legal in what sense?" "Well, as evidence in a court of law." "Oh, no," Sanders said. "These tapes would never be admissible in the court of law. But if they are exact copies, it's nothing to do with that. All forms of photographic evidence, including video, are no longer admissible in court." "I haven't heard that," I said. It hasn't happened yet," Sanders said. "The case law isn't entirely clear. But it's coming. All photographs are suspect these days, because now with digital systems, they can be changed perfectly. And that's something new. Remember years ago how the Russians would remove politicians from photographs of their May Day lineups? It was always a crude cut and paste job, and you could always see that something had been done. There was a funny space between the shoulders of the remaining people, or a discoloration on the back wall, or you could see the brushstrokes of the retoucher who tried to smooth over the damage. But anyway, you could see it fairly easily. You could see the picture had been altered. The whole business was laughable. "I remember," I said. "Photographs always had integrity precisely because they were impossible to change. So we considered photographs to represent reality. But for several years now, computers have allowed us to make seamless alterations of photographic images. A few years back, the National Geographic moved the Great Pyramid of Egypt on a cover photo. The editors didn't like where the pyramid was, and they thought it would compose better if it was moved. So they just altered the photograph and moved it. Nobody could tell, but if you go back to Egypt with a camera and try to duplicate that picture, you'll find you can't, because there is no place in the real world where the pyramids line up that way. The photographs no longer represents reality, but you can't tell. Minor example. And someone could do that, and someone could do the same thing to this tape. In theory, any video can be changed. On the monitor, I watched the murder occurring a second time. This camera was from the far end of the room. It didn't show the actual murder very well. But afterwards, Sakamoto was clearly visible as he walked towards the camera. I said, the image could be changed how? Sanders laughed. These days, you can make any damn change you want. Could you change the identity of the murderer? Technically, yes, Sanders said. Mapping a face onto a complex moving object is now possible. Technically possible. But as a practical matter, it'd be a bitch to do. I said nothing. But it was just as well. Sakamoto was our leading suspect, and he was dead. The chief wanted the case finished, so did I. Of course, Sanders said, the Japanese have all sorts of fancy video algorithms for surface mapping and three-dimensional transformations. They can do things that we can't begin to imagine. He drummed his fingers on the table again. What is the timetable of these tapes? What's their history? I said, the murder happened at 8:30 last night, as shown on the clock. We were told that the tapes were removed from the security office around 8:45 p.m. We asked for them, and there was some back and forth with the Japanese. As always, and when did you finally take possession? They were delivered to division headquarters around 1:30 a.m. Okay, Sanders said. That means they had that means they had the tapes from 8:45 to 1:30. Right. A little less than 5 hours. Sanders frowned. 5 tapes with 5 different camera angles to change in 5 hours. Sanders shook his head. No way, it just can't be done, Lieutenant. Yeah, Teresa said. It's impossible, even for them. It's just too many pixels to change. I said, You sure about that? Well, Teresa said, the only way it could be done that fast is with an automated program. And even the most sophisticated programs need you to polish the details by hand. Things like bad blur can give it all away. Bad blur? I said. I found I liked asking her questions. I liked looking at her face. Bad motion blur, Sanders said. Video runs at 30 frames a second. You can think of each frame of video as a picture. That's shot at a shutter speed of 1/30th of a second, which is very slow, much slower than a pocket camera's. If you film a runner at 1/30th of a second, the legs are just streaks, blurs. That's called motion blur. And if you altered it by a mechanical process, it starts to look wrong. The image appears too sharp, too crisp. Edges look odd. It's back to the Russians. You can see it's been changed. For realistic motion, you need the right amount of blur. I see, Teresa said. And there's the color shift. Right, Sanders said. Inside the blur itself, there is a color shift. For example, look there on the monitor. The man is wearing a blue suit, and his coat is stringing out as he spins the girl around the room. Now if you take a frame of that action and blow it up to its pixels, you will find that the coat is navy, but the blur is progressive shades of lighter blue, until at the edge it seems almost transparent. You can't tell from a single frame exactly where the coat ends and the background begins. I could vaguely imagine it, okay? If edge colors don't blend smoothly, you will notice it immediately. It can take hours to clean up a few seconds of tape. as in a commercial. But if you don't do it, you will see it like that. He snapped his fingers. So even though they duplicated the tapes, they couldn't have altered them. Not in 5 hours, Sanders said. They just didn't have the time. Then we are seeing what actually happened. No doubt about it, Sanders said. But we'll poke around with this image anyway. After you go, Teresa. Teresa wants to fiddle with it. I know she does. So do I. Check in with us later today. We'll tell you if there's anything funny, but basically it can't be done. And it wasn't done here.